This is Tumani Kamara, and it's time to open up the briefcase with Casey Holdahl.
Greetings, Pleasure fans, and welcome to The Briefcase, episode 107 of The Briefcase. I'm your host, Casey Holdahl, and today the NBA released the in-season tournament schedule for the 2024-25 season, or I should say the Emirates NBA Cup edition of the in-season tournament, which begins on November 12th. We'll talk about the Portland Trail Blazers group and their schedule before the release of the broader schedule that happens later on this week. But today, we'll look at the in-season tournament schedule, see the group the Portland Trail Blazers are in, and look at the 4 games that they'll play in the group stage before hopefully moving on to the knockout round on this edition of The Briefcase. Well, as you might remember, this is the second year for the in-season tournament for the NBA. They had the first season tournament last year, Los Angeles Lakers winning that one, and it went fairly well. So the idea is like, hey, let's go ahead and try this thing again. I imagine it's going to be a part of the NBA for some time. There'll probably be some tweaks here and there, but as far as I can tell, no real tweaks this time going into the second year of the in-season tournament, other than the fact that they're now calling it the Emirates Cup. Some of the important information about the upcoming 2024 NBA in-season tournament, aka the Emirates Cup. So first off, a quick reminder about how the in-season tournament works. So if you just watch the Olympics, you basically have a good idea of how these things work. There's 6 groups, 3 per conference, and the winner of each one of those groups and 2 wildcard winners goes on to play in the quarterfinals. Each team in each group plays 4 teams in the group stage before moving on to those knockout rounds. More specifically, this year, the tournament begins on November 12th and continues through Tuesday, December 3rd, with each team playing 4 designated group play games on cup nights, 1 game in each opponent in your group. Again, that's standard group play, with 2 games at home and 2 games on the road. 8 teams end up advancing, the 6 winners of each one of the groups, and then 2 wildcard teams that had the best records but did not win their groups, moving on to the quarterfinals, aka the knockout round, which will take place on December 10th and December 11th. The losing teams in those quarterfinal games in each conference will play each other in regular season games on December 12th, 13th, 15th, and the 16th. And the teams who do not advance to the quarterfinals will play 2 games, 1 at home, 1 on the road, on December 12th and December 13th, and December 15th and December 16th. So again, what's important to remember there, 8 teams advance to the knockout round, the 6 winners of each group and 2 wildcard winners, so 1 wildcard winner from each conference. The teams that don't advance to the knockout round each play 2 games, 1 at home, 1 on the road. The teams that do advance to the knockout round but then lose in the quarterfinals, aka the first of the knockout rounds, will then play each other while the other teams move on to the semifinals. And from there, the games shift to Las Vegas for the semifinals and the finals, which will be held on December 14th and 17th, respectively. So once the semifinals and the finals happen, those games take place in Las Vegas. The in-season tournament group stage games and the quarterfinals happen just wherever those games are scheduled at. Important thing to remember too, the in-season tournament games, the group stage games, the quarterfinal games, and the semifinal games all count towards a team's regular season schedule. It's only the final, the last game of the in-season tournament that does not go towards a team's regular season schedule. So let's go ahead and get to the groups, which were actually announced a couple weeks ago. I believe during the Las Vegas Summer League, they announced the in-season tournament groups. And how are those groups determined? The teams are separated into 5 pots based on their record from the 2023-24 season. And then those teams are picked at random from those pots. So basically the way it works is if you won a lot of games, you were highest in the standings, you're in pot 1. If you were in the lowest, you were in pot 5. And then everything kind of filters in between. The Trailblazers, having one of the worst records last season, were in pot 5. And through the random draw, the Trailblazers ended up in Group A, along with the Timberwolves, the Clippers, the Kings, and the Rockets. In my opinion, that's actually one of the easier groups in the West. I mean, there's no easy groups. The NBA seems as competitive as it's ever been. So any game you play in the NBA is going to be a tough one, particularly in these tournament games where, last season teams, I think, were kind of feeling it out a little bit. I think they realized that players and teams actually got a little excited for some of these tournament games. Things are a little bit different. You might recall they have different courts. They haven't announced what the courts are going to look like yet. I'm not sure if they're just running back the courts from last year or bringing in new courts. I would imagine there's going to be new courts, but I don't have any information on that just yet. Stay tuned for that. So they look a little bit different. They have a little bit of a different feel, and it seemed to really work, actually. And I think, while I don't know that there was like a huge bump in terms of ratings, I think people were interested in it. It was something to talk about. And so from that regard, I think it was a successful first season for the in-season tournament, which makes sense why they would run it back again this year. But again, Group A with the Trailblazers, Timberwolves, Clippers, Kings, and Rockets. Then you have Group B, which is the Thunder, Suns, Lakers, Jazz, and Spurs. And then Group C, which I think is the hardest group, which is the Nuggets, Mavericks, Pelicans, Warriors, and Grizzlies. And I don't really care what the Eastern Conference teams are at this point, or at least the Eastern Conference groups are at this point. We'll figure that part out if the Trailblazers do end up advancing in the in-season tournament to the knockout round. Until then, let the East do what the East is going to do. And so, in regards to the schedule, the important part, the thing that was announced today, Portland Trailblazers play their first in-season tournament game November 12th versus the Minnesota Timberwolves in Portland. After that, November 22nd at the Houston Rockets. After that, November 29th versus the Sacramento Kings. And after that, their final group stage game in the 2024 in-season tournament at LA Clippers. If they're one of the top teams in Group A, they advance on to the quarterfinals where they would either play at home or on the road, depending on what their record is. And if they won that quarterfinal game, they would then go on to play in Las Vegas in the semifinals and then potentially in the finals. If they do not advance in the in-season tournament and looking at their group, it's a pretty tough group. Every group is going to be difficult. Only one team gets a guaranteed bid, potentially two teams, but there's only one wild card per each conference. So pretty unlikely you're going to be one of those wild card teams unless you basically win all your games but one. So it's always going to be hard to advance, particularly where the Trailblazers are at right now and their process of rebuilding their team. They probably have bigger concerns in the in-season tournament. Though I would say that, winning an in-season tournament or at least making the knockout round would kind of give the team a little bit of juice. I think particularly when you're a young team, you know that you're building towards something later on. I think you can maybe put a little more emphasis on these in-season tournament games than maybe some other teams do. I don't know. You probably could. I mean, long story short, you need the talent to win in the NBA. And with these in-season tournament games, even though we don't know yet the full schedule, I believe the idea is that no team is going to go into these games with a rest disadvantage. So these aren't going to be on the second night of back-to-backs. They might be the first night of a back-to-back, but I believe they won't be on the second night of a back-to-back because they want to make sure that teams are fresh for these in-season tournament games. Once again, November 12th versus the Timberwolves, November 22nd at the Houston Rockets, November 29th versus Sacramento Kings, and December 3rd at the Los Angeles Lakers. One thing I will say about that schedule, we do know that if the Trailblazers are playing November 29th versus Sacramento Kings, that means they're going to be home for Thanksgiving this year, which I'm guessing not a whole lot of people care about. Except for your boy. I like to be home for Thanksgiving. It's nice. I like to be home for the holidays period. So that's one of the first things I always look at with the schedule is where are we at during the holidays? And at least this year, Thanksgiving, looks like we're going to be here in Portland. And then we'll have a tournament game the next day versus the Sacramento Kings. Nice way to, burn off some of the fat after a Thanksgiving is to roll out of bed and watch the Portland Trailblazers in a tournament game. Heck, go on down to Moda since that game is going to be at Portland versus Sacramento Kings November 29th. So there you have it, the Portland Trailblazers in West Group A, playing the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Houston Rockets, the Sacramento Kings, and the LA Clippers. If they advance to the quarterfinals, they'll either play at home or on the road. And if they win that game, to the semifinals, which take place in Las Vegas. And again, a reminder that the teams that don't advance to the quarterfinals will play two games, one at home and one on the road on December 12th or 13th and December 15th and 16th. And the semifinals and finals in Las Vegas are December 14th and December 17th. And again, one of the other things that's always important to remember about the in-season tournament is that these are games you would be playing anyways. So while they do look a little bit different because, again, they have different signage, the court looks different, these are games you're going to play regardless. So it's not like you're losing out on anything by having this tournament. You're just putting some of these games that you would be playing anyways into a tournament setting. So if you don't like the in-season tournament, that's cool. I'm not trying to tell you it's the greatest thing in the world, but these are games, again, that you're going to play anyways. So you put a little extra emphasis on them. What's the big deal? It's kind of fun. And I think we saw last season that it went pretty well. It wasn't like gangbusters or anything, but, it gives a little bit of juice. And I do think, having those games in Las Vegas, the semifinals and the finals, players are interested in that. And there's prize money, so for the players, there is a little bit of something to the in-season tournament. It does come with a little bit of extra intensity. Again, a little bit of extra juice. Anytime you just tweak things a little bit in the NBA, these guys are always so competitive. They want to win these games. And if you add any kind of extra impetus, it usually has a good effect. So, between playing in Vegas and between getting some prize money, you have pretty good buy-in from the players and the teams. And I think the fans generally like the games. And again, they're just games you would play anyways. Otherwise, until you get to the quarterfinals and the semifinals, that is one of the different things about the in-season tournament. Even though those games count towards your regular season schedule, it is kind of interesting that you could conceivably, I think, end up playing a team 5 times in your conference. So if you end up matched up in the quarterfinals against a team that you already have 4 set games against, that quarterfinal game would be a 5th game, which, you typically don't play a team 5 times in the regular season. So that's kind of interesting. And I guess, if you play the quarterfinals versus the team that you played 4 times already on your schedule, and then your semifinal team and your finals team, I guess conceivably you could play 3 teams 5 times in conference. Well, no, because the quarterfinal, well, that's not true because the final team would be from the other conference. So that's not the case. But yeah, that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. So you can end up playing 2 teams 5 times. I don't know that actually happened last season. I know it didn't happen for the Trailblazers because they didn't advance. And that's kind of when I checked out of paying attention to the in-season tournament last year. But maybe they'll get lucky this year. Maybe they're able to win some of those games. And again, for a team that is still kind of building towards something going forward, the in-season tournament gives you a little something to pay attention to be excited about. And it happens early on in the season too. So it does kind of get you right into the thick of things if you're someone that's interested in the in-season tournament, which it's not going anywhere. So you might as well pay a little bit of attention to it, or at least you should know what is going to happen in the in-season tournament, which is why I tried to do on this edition of the Briefcase. Thank you so much for joining me, as always. As I mentioned, one last time, November 12th versus the Minnesota Timberwolves, November 22nd at the Houston Rockets, November 29th versus Sacramento Kings, and December 3rd versus the Los Angeles Clippers, then quarterfinals, then semifinals, then final. If you don't make it to the quarterfinals, you play 2 games during the week that they have the quarterfinals and the semifinals, 1 at home, 1 on the road. And if not, and then after that, you should continue on with your schedule as you would otherwise anyways. So that is your primer for the 2024 Emirates Cup in-season tournament. As I mentioned, the broader NBA schedule will be announced later on this week, so another edition coming up breaking down that schedule as well. And then it's about a month off until we begin training camp. So while the schedule release is the last big piece of off-season news, not a whole lot of time until training camp starts at the end of September. So we'll talk to you later on this week when the NBA schedule is announced. This has been an in-season tournament edition of The Briefcase. Thanks so much for joining me. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast to The Briefcase, to the Blazers Balcony, which will be coming back closer to the season, and to Section 113 with Michael Holton and Travis Demers. I'm Casey Holdahl. Thank you as always for joining me. We'll talk to you later on this week. Go Blazers.